By the time the story of that one storage unit made its way through the coffee counters and barbershops of the county, most people had already decided it was either cursed or not worth the trouble. It was a unit at the far end of the row, the one that always seemed to appear on the auction list and then vanish the day before, as if someone somewhere still had a hand on the brake. Most folks shrugged and moved on. But for Ed and Lori Wesson, who had reached a point in life where days all looked a little too similar, that stubborn metal door would become the first real surprise they'd had in years. Their life was not tragic, just tight. After 40 years in the same small town, they lived in a single-story house with a sagging porch and a yard that refused to grow grass evenly. His pension from the parts warehouse came in on the dot each month. Her Social Security check followed a few days later, and between them they kept the lights on, the pantry modestly full, and the doctor bills paid eventually. They still had the old sedan in the driveway, a faded blue four-door that knew its way to the grocery store and back without much complaint. What they didn't have anymore were extras, the small wants that used to slip into life without permission. Lately, for reasons he could not quite explain, one of those wants had taken a very specific shape in Ed's mind. A simple red moped, nothing fancy, just enough to let him ride the side streets on cool evenings instead of watching them from the front window. The thought came often when he stood in line at the gas station or watched teenagers glide past on scooters after school, but he always put away. You did not spend retirement money on toys, even small ones. The idea of storage auctions came in sideways, the way trouble and opportunity often do. One Tuesday morning at the diner, while Lori worked through her crossword, and Ed stirred his coffee more than he drank it, two men at the next booth began talking just loud enough for curiosity to overhear. They mentioned a locker someone had bought for $400 and emptied for 20 times that, all because the previous owner had walked away from boxes he never should have trusted to rust. When the men left, Ed noticed a faded flyer pinned to the community board near the door. Public storage auction, it read. Abandoned units sold as is. The location was a facility out on the state road, a place they passed whenever they went to the discount grocery. He tore off the little strip with the website address and tucked it into his wallet as if he were just keeping it safe for someone braver. That evening, while the news murmured in the background and the cat snored in a chair older than their children, he typed the address into the ancient desktop that lived on a small desk by the window. The auction list loaded slowly, each thumbnail photo a gray little mystery. Most of the units looked exactly like what you'd expect. Sagging mattresses, broken dressers, plastic bags that bulged in worrying ways. Then one picture made him lean forward. The frame was darker than the others, the light coming in from the side instead of directly from the door. But near the center of the photo, a curved red shape caught his eye. Painted metal, smooth, with just enough chrome edging to look familiar. To one side were rows of stacked boxes, each labeled with painter's tape and careful marker, and along the back, he could see the slope of a garment rack. It did not look like junk. It looked like someone had been living a plan in there. When he zoomed in, the red curve sharpened into what his heart had already named. The rear fender of a scooter, the type he'd been thinking about for months. He did not say fate aloud, but the words stood in the room with him anyway. The listing said Unit 47B and showed an opening bid that made his stomach tighten. It wasn't impossible, but it was more than they usually moved in a single decision. Lori, who had followed him to the desk with the resigned patience of a woman who knew when her husband was about to talk himself into something, read the description twice. They talked about broken appliances, about people who bid and regretted, about how this was exactly the sort of thing that turned into a story other people shook their heads at. In the end, they made a rule that felt safe enough to keep. They would go on Saturday, stand in the back, and only watch. No bidding, no hand-raising, no $900 mistakes. Saturday morning came cool and bright, the kind of early light that made even the cracked asphalt of the storage yard look gentler. The facility sat behind a chain-link fence, its rows of orange doors lined up like teeth in a tired grin. A dozen or so people milled around auctioneer's pickup truck, cups of coffee steaming white against the air. Most of them wore the uniform of regulars, work boots, faded caps, the watchful posture of people who had taught themselves to read value from 20 feet away. Ed signed the bidder card because the manager said everyone had to, even just to watch, and tucked it into his jacket pocket where his fingers kept finding it. They watched 3 units open and close with all the drama of a yard sale. A man bought a locker full of lawn equipment. A young couple picked up one that held little besides baby furniture and hope. Ed's heart stayed steady. Their rules still held. When the auctioneer called 47B, something in the air shifted. The group walked toward the far end of the row, the part of the facility that backed up against a line of stunted trees and a drainage ditch. The manager slid off the lock, rolled up the door, and a bar of sunlight reached across the floor like a hand. There it was, exactly as the photo had promised, a red moped parked squarely in the middle, clean enough to have been ridden last week, its mirrors folded in with care. To the left, shoe boxes rose in neat towers, each marked with sizes and brands. To the right, plastic bins with blue lids sat in an orderly column. Along the back wall hung jackets and coats under clear plastic, the outlines crisp, the shoulders uncrumpled. It looked less like abandonment and more like someone had run out of time halfway through a plan. Ed felt his chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with age. He wasn't the only one doing quiet math. A man in a leather vest leaned in, checked the scooter's brand, and muttered something about resale. Another bidder shook his head and backed away. Organized units meant work, not easy flips. As the auctioneer started his patter, calling for an opening offer, Ed realized that most eyes were already sliding past this door to whatever came next. People like piles. Piles suggested surprises, or to suggested someone who knew exactly what they had, which often meant less easy profit. There was a small, unexpected safety in that. It gave him time to breathe. The first bid came in low from a woman near the front, more out of habit than passion. A reseller in a flannel shirt nudged it up by 50. The auctioneer kept his rhythm, voice bouncing off metal and mourning. Lori stood close enough to feel her husband's heartbeat vibrate through his sleeve. She knew that look down to the angle of his jaw. Interest layered over worry, temptation softened by a lifetime of being careful. Somewhere between the second and third bid, she realized her no-bidding rule had already begun to fray. People like Ed, the quiet ones who rarely asked life for anything extra, were the same people who made stories like this worth listening to. If you are the kind of person who leans in when somebody finally takes a small risk after decades of doing everything right, you already understand why channels that share these true, slow stories ask gently for likes, for subscriptions, for a comment with the town you're listening from. It is not noise. It is how these moments travel beyond the parking lot where they began. When the price hovered just below the number Ed and Lori had grudgingly admitted they could manage, something unexpected happened. The woman in front who had been leading the bidding took a call, turned away, and shook her head at the auctioneer with a small wave. The man in flannel hesitated, frowned at the scooter as if trying to see a flaw that simply was not there, and dropped his gaze. For a heartbeat, the yard went quiet, the hum of the nearby road fading to a low blur. Before he could talk himself out of it, Ed raised his bidder card halfway, the gesture small but irrevocable. The auctioneer pointed, repeated the number, and waited. No one countered. The gavel came down with a hollow crack that sounded to Lori like the closing of one door and the opening of another after the paperwork. The reality felt both bigger and smaller than the moment. $900 was more than they casually spent, less than some of the mopeds' likely value, and the contents neatly lining the walls, but it was still money that could have gone to roof repairs or dental work or an extra cushion in the checking account. The manager, seeing their mixture of excitement and unease, mentioned offhand that this particular unit had been on the list 3 times before and pulled each time at the last minute when the renter came in with another month's cash. Always on time, always alone, he said, shrugging. Then one day the payment stopped. No forwarding address. No answer at the phone on file. Took us 6 months to get the legal right to cut that lock. You're the first ones it actually stuck for. He handed them a new brass key with the facility's logo stamped into its bow and reminded them of the 48-hour rule. They walked back down the road together, the orange doors reflecting the late morning glare. In front of 47B they paused. The door now there's a roll-up whenever they chose. Ed slid the key into the latch and rested his hand on the handle, feeling the cool of the metal against his palm. They could open it now, in their good clothes, with the sun too high and the air already warm, or they could wait until tomorrow, come in work jeans with a thermos and a plan. He looked at the thin shadow under the door, where a sliver of red paint and chrome just barely showed, like a wink. Lori saw the same thing he did. Not just a scooter, but the possibility that for once in their careful lives, a risk might actually lean in their favor. They did not speak. The door stayed down. They turned away to go home and gather boxes, gloves, and courage, leaving behind a neat row of metal ribs and one silent moped, waiting in the dark for the moment someone would finally let it see the light again. The next morning, the world felt different in that subtle way it sometimes does before a turning point reveals itself. Ed and Lori drove back to the storage facility just after opening. Their coffee still too hot to sip, and the sky the pale color of cooled steel. The car hummed along the familiar road, but neither of them spoke. It wasn't the silence of doubt or disagreement. It was a kind of silence that comes when two people sense they're standing at the edge of something unplanned and possibly important. Ed's hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, but every few seconds his thumb tapped an anxious rhythm against the leather. Not fear, not excitement either. Something in between, a quiet readiness. Lori noticed, of course. She always did. But instead of questioning him, she placed her hand over his for a brief moment, the way she had done thousands of times during their marriage when words were unnecessary. The facility looked emptier than the day before. The auction crowd was gone, the chatter replaced with a distant hum of traffic, and the soft scrape of the groundskeeper dragging a broom across the concrete. Without people blocking a line of doors, the place felt larger, almost echoing, each orange metal panel holding its own unopened world. Ed parked near Unit 47B and exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Lori stepped out, tightening her cardigan around her shoulders, her eyes sweeping the long corridor as if half expecting someone else to be there. But they were alone, just the two of them, and the quiet weight of a purchase they still didn't fully understand. Ed slid the brass key into the new lock the manager had clipped on the previous afternoon. The metal was cold under his fingers, the way cold metal sometimes feels like it remembers more than it should. With a firm twist, the latch clicked open. He raised the door slowly, and as it rolled upward with a dry metallic groan, morning light spilled across the concrete floor, widening into the full reveal of what they had bought. The red moped stood exactly where it had yesterday, centered, spotless, almost oddly untouched for something stored in a rented unit. Around it, stacks of shoeboxes arranged too neatly to belong to the usual chaos of abandoned storage, garment bags lined in a disciplined row, and the tall blue-lidded bins labeled in tight handwriting no larger than a schoolteacher's notes. It didn't look like someone's leftovers. It looked like someone's life, paused cleanly mid-sentence. They moved inside with the kind of carefulness usually reserved for unfamiliar museums. Ed spread out the moving blanket on the floor and positioned his phone for documentation. He wanted photos of every box, every open lid, every object, not because he expected trouble, but because older instincts reminded him that order protects people who don't have money to waste. Lori pulled out a fresh notebook, writing the date and the unit number at the top of the first page. Then, almost unconsciously, she wrote a small, quiet line beneath it. Do this right. She didn't show it to Ed, but he would have nodded if he had seen it. That was how they worked. Always careful, always trying to do things right, even when life didn't reward them for it. The first shoebox was so light Lori almost laughed. Inside lay a pair of brand new sneakers. White, perfectly folded stuffing paper inside, laces still bound like ribbon. The next box held a similar surprise. And the next. Soon, a pattern began to emerge. Everything was clean, curated, intentional. No dust, no moisture, no rush packing. Whoever owned this unit hadn't been careless or overwhelmed. They had been deliberate, and they clearly had an eye for quality. One column in, they found expensive winter boots. Another held running shoes in sizes that didn't match each other. All new. It wasn't junk. It was inventory. Good inventory. By the time they reached the fourth stack, Ed found a box heavier than the rest. His brows lifted slightly as he opened it. Inside, wrapped in velvet, lay a well-kept Movado watch, a small envelope labeled sterling, and a gold-filled bracelet in pristine condition. Not a fortune, but not small money either. Lori photographed everything. Her hand steady though her pulse wasn't. She noted a small in the margin of her notebook, a mark she used whenever something might matter more than it seemed. They shared a glance, unspoken but clear. This was already more than they had expected. They turned toward the garment rack next, and as the coats slid free of their plastic coverings, the story of their previous owner sharpened even further. A heavy winter parka, with a price tag so high it made Ed softly whistle. Then a leather jacket that smelled like it had just left a specialty shop. Then a denim coat that cracked faintly as Ed lifted it. The sound of quality, not age, mixed between them. One damaged lining, one faded collar, but everything kept clean, folded with intention, cared for. People with money don't always keep things as carefully. People with purpose do. Midway down the rack, Lori found something unusual, a garment bag with the bottom stitched shut in a small X. She unpicked it carefully with the tiny scissors she always carried, revealing a Navy mechanic's jacket with the embroidered name patch neatly removed. It was heavier than expected. When she checked the inner hem, tucked where only someone very intentional would store things, she found a keyring taped together and labeled in small, neat handwriting, GYM/tool/scoot. The word scoot sent a flicker through Ed's expression. He didn't rush to the moped. He placed the keys on the blanket first, photographed them thoroughly, then approached the scooter like a man dealing with something important. The first key didn't fit. The second didn't seat. The third slid in perfectly. And when he turned it a fraction, the moped's dashboard lit up with a soft, confident blue glow. He turned it off immediately, not from fear, but respect. Machines deserve respect when there's someone else's story before they're yours. The two of them looked at each other, and for the first time since bidding on this unit, Ed allowed himself to smile, really smile, the kind that makes him look 10 years younger. They weren't done, and the story wasn't done with them. Because sometimes, the first real look isn't about what you find, it's about what begins waking up. They settled into a rhythm as the morning stretched forward, the kind of steady, thoughtful progress that long-married couples develop without ever discussing it. Ed focused on the heavier items, the bins that required lifting and rearranging, while Lori documented and sorted each find with the patience of someone who understood that care today prevented confusion tomorrow. The storage unit had begun as a curiosity, a gamble on a red moped and a gut feeling. But the deeper they went, the more it resembled a well-structured puzzle someone had arranged with intention. Nothing felt random. Every object, every label, every piece of tape seemed placed by a hand that didn't believe in chaos. It made the air inside the unit feel strangely aware, as though the space itself expected them to be cautious with its story. The blue-lidded bins along the right wall held more variety than the neat rows of shoeboxes. The first bin, labeled with a strip of painter's tape reading audio, cable/spare, contained exactly that. Coil cables held in place with Velcro ties, an empty headphone shell, and a few carefully wrapped adapters. Nothing exciting, but everything clean and purposeful. The next bin, electronics personal, revealed a Sony Watchman, the sort of portable television Ed remembered from break rooms and late-night weather updates in his younger years, along with a pair of new headphones trapped in clear clamshell packaging. It looked like someone had been assembling their own categorized toolkit shelf by shelf. Then Ed opened the laptop sleeve tucked in the corner of that same bin, and paused long enough for Lori to notice the shift in his posture. The sleeve held not a laptop, but a .177 air pistol placed in a piece of foam that had clearly been cut to fit its shape. Legal, but surprising. Unsettling, even. It wasn't the sort of item someone tossed into a storage unit by accident. Ed wrapped in one of their moving towels and set aside carefully, writing air pistol secure in the notebook in a margin Lori rarely used. The presence of the gun didn't terrify them, but it did tilt the story. People who keep tools as organized don't usually store weapons unless they feel the need to, and people who feel the need to don't usually abandon perfectly cataloged possessions. They decided to take a short break, sitting at the threshold where cooler air drifted in from the open corridor. The age in their knees made itself known, but so did the quiet energy of possibility. They sipped from their thermos, watching a delivery truck stop near the main gate. Neither spoke about the air pistol. Neither had to. It sat behind them like a silent reminder that this unit belonged to someone whose life had taken an unexpected turn. When they resumed, Lori lifted a soft duffel bag from the floor near the bins. Under a layer of neatly folded hoodies were 3 purses, each in its own branded dust bag. She knew quality when she touched it. Decades of raising kids, sewing hems, and stretching every dollar had given her hands a built-in lie detector. The hardware on 2 of the bags confirmed they were genuine, not knockoffs sold on folding tables outside malls. The third had a faint water stain, but even so, the leather was premium. Ed photographed each item as Lori checked serial tags and stitching, her breath soft but growing steadier. These weren't fortune-making finds, but they were real money, enough to matter, enough to ease the quiet strain they had grown used to living with. Under the purses lay a small black notebook with worn edges, and an elastic band stretched a little too thin to hold anything firmly closed. The initials RJ were embossed in faint gold on the corner. Not a diary. No dates, no feeling, just a ledger of purchases, all written with the same compact, precise script that labeled every box around them. Shoes logged by brand, size, color. Jackets listed with condition notes and purchase dates. On one page, almost casually, a line written at the bottom. Scoot, 2018 ZN50, 3,002 miles, second key tape seat hinge. It wasn't unusual information, but the placement of it, tucked into the seam of a page about jackets, felt like a whisper meant only for someone patient enough to read everything carefully. Ed went to the moped and ran his finger along the underside of the seat. A small flap of padding lifted, revealing tape darkened by time. Inside it, a second key and a folded slip of paper. He carried both back to the blanket and unfolded the note, half expecting something simple like an old insurance card. Instead, it was a photocopied DMV vehicle affidavit. The previous owner's name was covered with tape, the VIN handwritten along the bottom, and beneath that a message written in the same careful script. Verified, not stolen. VSP callback never came. If I'm not here, whoever find this, please be cautious who offers help. The temperature of the room seemed to shift, enough that Lori instinctively wrapped her cardigan closer. This wasn't the handwriting of someone reckless. This was a man who documented everything, who expected to need proof someday, who left warnings tucked into places no one would check unless they were searching with intention. They didn't interpret it as danger. Not yet, but they felt the presence of a stranger's story beginning to breathe between the boxes. They continued working, drawn forward by curiosity and the sense that everything they uncovered belonged to a narrative they weren't yet equipped to understand. Ed opened a plain cardboard box containing a compact turntable still packed in molded foam. 2 envelopes were taped under the lid, one marked receipts, the other simply labeled 1988. He didn't open the older one immediately. Instead, he logged everything first, because order was their anchor now, around them. The storage unit remained silent except for the faint creak of leather and the soft rustle of paper. When they finally stopped for the day, the floor was lined with organized rows of photographed goods, each cluster forming a clearer picture of the person who once owned them. This wasn't a collector in the eccentric sense. This wasn't a hoarder. This wasn't panic. It was disciplined acquisition. Someone who bought carefully, stored deliberately, and left breadcrumbs for anyone willing to follow a trail instead of a shortcut. They stepped outside into the waning light. Ed locked the unit again, running his thumb lightly across the brass, as if sealing something important behind it. The red paid. Tag fluttered slightly in the breeze. Lori looked over the quiet rows of other units and felt a small sense of certainty settle inside her. Not dread, not fear, but a sense that the next time they opened that door, the story would open a little further too. And sometimes clarity arrives not with a shock, but with a slow, steady unfolding of what you didn't yet know to expect. By the 4th morning, the novelty of the storage unit had shifted into something deeper, something that felt halfway between responsibility and fate. Ed and Lori arrived earlier than usual, stepping out of their car into a crisp, gray light that made everything appear sharper. The fence line, the narrow aisles between the buildings, even a red security tag hanging from their lock. They had learned to read small details over the years, and the moment they walked up to 47B, both of them felt the same subtle wrongness. The security tag hung at a slightly different angle than the day before. Not cut, not broken, just twisted once, as though a hand had lifted it, paused, and placed it back with an unnecessary amount of care. It was the kind of detail easy to miss unless life had taught you to pay attention. Ed checked the stamp numbers on the tag, the shape of the brass hasp, the tiny rust spot on the corner of the latch. Nothing else was out of place. The unit looked untouched, and yet the difference hummed in the air like a soft warning. Lori didn't say anything, but her eyebrows had tightened the way they always did when her instincts whispered before her voice did. Together they unlocked the door and rolled it upward, the metal groaning against the cool morning air. The unit greeted them exactly as they had left it. The red moped sounded like a stage prop, the garment rack neat and quiet like a closet waiting for its owner, the bins lined in patient rows. But the room didn't feel the same. Everything inside seemed too still, too composed, as if whoever organized it originally had returned after they left and made one final adjustment. And then they saw it, the small cassette recorder they had logged the previous afternoon. It no longer sat where they left it. The adapter they'd found clipped to its side was gone, coiled neatly next to it as though placed by someone who respected the object but not the boundary that protected it. A faint blue LED blinked on the recorder's edge, slow, deliberate, alive. A battery pack had been attached, wrapped in fresh tape. Someone had charged it. Someone wanted it to be played. Ed didn't touch the device right away. He examined it as a professional might study a complicated hinge, noting tiny differences, cataloging alterations. Only after he photographed a recorder from 3 angles and wrote a timestamp in the notebook did he press play and step back. Lori stood slightly behind him, listening the way one listens for breaking glass. The first sound were not words. They were room noises, a chair moving, a breath close to the microphone, the quiet scrape of paper. When the voice finally arrived, it was controlled and clear, belonging to a man who chose his diction like he chose his possessions, with method and intention. The speaker said the unit number, the date, and the same phrase they had seen written in careful ink on the back of photographs. If missing, call. He didn't introduce himself. He identified only his initials, the same one stamped on the black ledger, RJ. The recording explained patterns they had begun to suspect but could not yet articulate. The bins weren't random storage. They were cataloged evidence. The repeated labels weren't for personal convenience, but for continuity. Patterns preserved so someone else could follow them. Even the garment rack and the moped were arranged exactly, not simply placed. The voice described which objects were decoys, where duplicates were hidden, and which items should not be sold without documentation. It was less a confession and more a guided map for whoever might someday open the door with enough honesty to follow it to the end. Halfway through recording, the tone changed. Papers shifted, a soft sigh broke the rhythm, and then the speaker listed 3 kinds of people who might enter the unit after him: thieves, brokers, and strangers with decent hands. To the first group, he offered no instructions. To the second, he offered warnings. But to the third, those with decent hands, he left a detailed plan. He explained that a safe deposit key was hidden inside the moped's odometer shroud, taped in a place only someone careful enough would uncover. Inside that bank box were documents proving his collection had been targeted years earlier by a quiet ring that specialized in estate manipulation, removing valuables, mislabeling inheritances, funneling artifacts into unofficial channels. RJ had been documenting their activity for decades, preserving records so the story couldn't be erased even if he was. The tape didn't ask Ed and Lori for trust. It simply laid out facts. Facts that someone powerful wanted buried. Facts that someone else, someone patient, meticulous, and increasingly afraid, had preserved behind layers of boxes and caution. When the recorder clicked off, leaving only the soft hum of the storage facility beyond the door, they didn't speak. Silence felt safer. They worked with quiet discipline, just as the voice had instructed. Ed removed the odometer shroud with slow, methodical movements. The hidden brass key waited exactly where the tape described. Beside it, folded with mathematical precision, was a card bearing the number of a specific safe deposit drawer. The handwriting matched every label in the room. Then he found something the tape hadn't mentioned, a small cloth roll tucked beneath the lock mechanism, bound with twine. Inside were 5 coins, each older than statehood, a thin chain with a car clasp, and a ring set with a stone so modest it seemed out of place among items of greater value. But they weren't the real treasure. The envelope beneath them held photocopied appraisals, each stamped by a museum registrar and dated years earlier. These documents tied every item in the storage unit to a case file that vanished before it could be submitted to court. It was careful, it was complicated, and it was dangerous. By early afternoon, the rain had begun, tapping rhythmically on the metal roof above them. The aisles filled with the soft echo of water running down gutters, masking the smaller sounds, the moped frame cooling, the shifting of old leather adjusting to temperature. They kept working until their notes filled nearly half a binder. Only when they stepped outside to load the car did they see the pale sedan parked near the fence line, the same one Lori had noticed days earlier. No movement inside, no headlights, just a faint outline of someone sitting completely still, watching the row where their unit stood. When they turned toward the office, the car started slowly, pulled away without hurry, and disappeared around the corner of the property. They didn't discuss it. The air pistol, the warning notes, the altered security tag. Each detail layered itself atop the next like sediment building a quiet truth. Someone was waiting. Someone believed they had rights to the items inside 47B. And whoever that person was, they had already been inside once. Ed locked the door again, double-checking the tag, the latch, the alignment of every inch of metal. The red moped sat behind the steel curtain, silent and steady under the blanket they'd pulled over it. The ledger lay in its folder, the keys and documents logged, photographed, and sealed in duplicates. Everything controlled, everything documented. They walked back to their car slowly, letting the rain tap their jackets and settling into the heavy quiet shared only by people who understand the full weight of what they carry. They didn't need to say that tomorrow would change everything. They felt in the way the gate closed behind them, in the way the sky darkened toward evening, in the way the stranger's car had waited without moving. Everything in 47B had been arranged with purpose. And now, for the first time, they understood they had stepped directly into the center of someone else's unfinished plan. The morning they decided to open the safe deposit box arrived with a strange kind of clarity, the kind that often follows days of tension, when exhaustion sharpens instincts instead of dulling them. Ed and Lori left their house before sunrise, driving in the soft blue-gray hour when the world hasn't fully awakened and thoughts can move without interruption. They carried only what mattered. The brass key taped under the moped shroud, the folder of receipts and notes, and the quiet determination that had settled between them like a vow. The bank sat tucked between a hardware store and a dental office, a small brick building with clean windows and a sign too modest to draw attention. Yet, as they pulled into the nearly empty lot, both felt the weight of the moment pressing gently on their shoulders, the way life sometimes leans in before it changes direction. Inside, the safe deposit room was hushed, the kind of silence that seemed designed to keep history from slipping out of its drawers. The clerk, a polite middle-aged woman with the calm efficiency of someone who'd unlocked these boxes for decades, checked the key twice before guiding them to a private table. The box slid out with a soft metallic whisper, long and narrow, its brushed steel surface glowing faintly under the overhead lights. When she left them alone, Ed lifted the lid with the care of a man touching something he respected but didn't yet understand. Inside lay a single thick envelope, a second smaller packet bound with twine, and a flash drive taped to a folded letter. The envelope held financial records, bank statements, appraisal sheets, insurance documents, all perfectly organized and cross-referenced with dates that matched the ledger in the storage unit. But the shock came when they reached the back of the packet, where several forms signed and notarized indicated ownership transfer rights for specific items stored in Unit 47B. These were not claims of inheritance, not disputed assets, but legally executed documents showing that RJ had transferred his collection to an unnamed successor to be determined upon discovery. He had prepared his escape from the system that had swallowed others before him, and he had chosen to leave the last step in the hands of whomever proved careful enough to follow his instructions. The smaller twine-bound packet held something entirely different, For glossy photographs of high-value items from a unit, coins, leather pieces, vintage watches, each accompanied by an appraisal significantly higher than anything Ed and Lori had dared estimate. The numbers weren't modest. The numbers weren't symbolic. The lowest appraisal crossed $40,000. The highest exceeded $120,000. Next to each photograph was a short line in the same precise handwriting. For the finder, sell ethically. It wasn't charity. It wasn't burden. It was permission paired with responsibility. The letter was the last to be opened. Written in the same compact script, it explained, without drama or embellishment, why these items have been hidden. To protect them from a firm that specialized in draining estates before families ever realized what was gone. RJ had been documenting the pattern for years, storing duplicates, copies, and originals in rotating locations. Unit 47B had been his final repository, his insurance against being erased. He knew someone would come for the items eventually. He didn't know who, but he hoped there would be people who valued honesty over haste. His final instruction read simply, "If you are reading this, sunlight has found its stewards. Sell what must be sold. Keep what matters. Use the rest to build the life denied to me. Reward equals daylight, and daylight belongs to you now." When they left the bank, neither spoke for several minutes. Some moments don't need words. They need space. The papers in their hands didn't represent mystery anymore. They represented opportunity and relief. With proper authentication, consignment, and legal paperwork, they wouldn't just earn a symbolic reward. They would earn enough to change their lives. The next week unfolded like a series of carefully measured steps. Their attorney reviewed the documents and confirmed that the transfer rights were valid. A museum registrar verified the appraisals and vouched for the authenticity of several rare items. A reputable auction house accepted the collection without hesitation, praising the meticulous documentation that RJ had protected so fiercely. Within 3 weeks, the auction results came back. Their combined payout exceeded $380,000. Even after taxes, after fees, after setting aside donations for the museum pieces RJ had flagged, the sum that landed in their account was larger than any number they had ever imagined seeing beside their name. And with it came something far more valuable: peace. They paid off their small remaining debts. They repaired their home in ways they had postponed for years. New roof, new paint. A garden fence Lori had wanted since before retirement. They placed a portion of the funds into an account for medical security, something that had worried them quietly for too long. And then, one bright afternoon, Ed did something that made Lori's eyes warm with joy. He bought a red moped of his own, not a collector's piece, not a machine wrapped in mystery or danger, but a simple, reliable scooter meant for slow rides through quiet streets. Sometimes he rode it to the grocery store, sometimes to the park, sometimes for no reason at all except that life was finally wide enough to enjoy without counting every mile. Lori found her own way to honor the journey. She framed the brass key they found beneath the odometer shroud and hung it beside a photograph from their early marriage, the two images telling a story nobody else would ever fully understand. She volunteered twice a week at the local library, helping catalog donations with the same precise care she used in the storage unit. And in the evenings, after dinner, she and Ed sat on their porch, letting the world move gently around them while they enjoyed a quiet earned the hard way. They never heard from the pale sedan again, never saw the man who had slipped that threatening card under their latch. Perhaps he had realized the story was no longer his to control. Perhaps he understood that sunlight had already done its work. What remained was simple and beautiful. Two people who had spent their lives doing their best finally received a chance that did not take anything from them, but gave back everything they quietly wished for. And in the end, it wasn't luck or danger or mystery that shaped their new life. It was the steady courage of choosing to follow the truth all the way to its end. The moral was not complicated, not dramatic, not wrapped in riddles. Sometimes life hides its rewards in the most unexpected places. Sometimes good people receive what was meant for them all along. And sometimes, when you open a door simply because you're willing to look inside, you find a future waiting patiently on the other side, with daylight bright enough for both of you.